2, 1. Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session of the day. We are joined by a wonderful group of panelists, community leaders who have collaborated with CEEJH to develop community-based air quality monitoring networks in the Southeast, the Mid-Atlantic, and the New Jersey region of the U.S. So I'd like to start off with a few introductions before we get started with today's presentations. So my name is Brendan Lewis. I'll be the moderator for this session. I am a doctoral student at Yale University in the School of the Environment. My research details quantifying air pollution from different types of emission sources, such as animal farms, traffic emissions, and something that we're going to be talking about today, just moving goods and services. And I look at emissions from moving building materials. So I would like to give each panelist around a 2-minute time for introducing themselves. Tell us about your work, yourself, and how your work is related to today's theme of environmental justice and hyper-local air quality monitoring. So let's start with Alan Smith.
Hey, everybody. Wonderful to be here. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alan Smith. I work with Consumer Reports, and a lot of our work, Consumer Reports is a large and sweeping organization doing all kinds of different consumer protection, consumer advocacy. But the work that is most relevant to discussion today has been very much focused around last mile warehouses and the environmental justice ramifications of those warehouses and their placement and the ways in which the communities in which they are placed are suffering as a result of these warehouses being kind of dropped on their heads. So yeah, I will talk a little bit about some research and investigative reporting that my colleague Kaveh Waddell has been doing over the past year, and then we'll maybe hopefully in my period of time pivot a little bit to kind of the measuring and the activism and community engagement that we're trying to launch off of that. And excited to hear from my fellow panelists and figure out hopefully from them what we need to measure more concisely. So I hope that we can have time to have that open discussion as we go.
All right, thank you, Mr. Smith. Omar Muhammad.
Good afternoon, everyone. Omar Muhammad. I am currently the Executive Director for the Low Country Alliance for Model Communities here in the city of North Charleston. And we have launched and helped the community to launch citizen science programs around monitoring air. So not only do we monitor the impact from the goods movement that come from the South Carolina port, that comes from the intermodal facility that is adjacent to the port, but we also train residents on collecting data from using low-cost sensors as more of a screening tool, not as a regulatory tool, but more as a screening tool, and then being able to tap into our academic partners to do more robust analysis and studies with more robust monitoring tools. So I'm excited to talk about how that project began and where we are now currently. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Welcome, Mr. Muhammad. Next, we have Rachel White.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Today, I'm going to be talking about Achieving Community Tasks Successfully, a community-based organization in the Houston, Texas area. And we've actually established our own community air monitoring network. And so I'll be discussing that and giving you some analysis that we've done and information on how other communities can set up these air monitoring networks.
All right. Thank you, Ms. White. Next, we have Kim Gaddy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kim Gaddy. I am the National and New Jersey Environmental Justice Director for Clean Water Action and founder of the South Water Environmental Alliance. Clean Water Action is a national organization located in 14 different states. And we are the organization that founded the Clean Water Act in 1972. And over the years that I've been employed with Clean Water Action for 21 years, I reside in the South Ward of the city of Newark, which is the backyard of the second largest port in the nation. 25 to 30,000 trucks come in and out our backyard of the port daily, and 4,500 of those trucks stay on our local roads. And so it's really important for us to make sure the voices of the community are heard, and they have the ability to partner with organizations that can help us resolve the cumulative impacts of pollution that we suffer from just because of the zip code that we reside in. And so I will be talking about the great partnership that we have with Dr. Kaveh Wilson and his team, Clean Water Action, and the South Ward Environmental Alliance, which is an organization consisting of residents and businesses in the South Ward of the three neighborhoods within the city of Newark. Thank you, and looking forward to our conversation.
All right, thank you and welcome, Ms. Gaddy. And we have Dr. Shizuka Hsieh.
Hi, I'm Shizuka Hsieh. I teach chemistry at Trinity Washington University, and I am a physical chemist by training. So lasers and spectroscopy is what I did for my PhD, but 2009 changed everything. I had a fellowship at US EPA, and I started looking at environmental justice issues. And that really changed my life, so that when I moved to DC in 2012, I was able to get connected with Shikobi, and Shikobi then connected me to neighborhoods that wanted some more air quality monitoring. And so I'm going to talk about some of the challenges and lessons that I've learned from working with those communities in DC.
All right, and welcome, Dr. Hsieh. And I'm excited to hear everyone's presentations. So let's go ahead and kick it off. If it's all right, we'll go ahead and start with you, Omar, and you can kick us off.
All right, cool. So I'm gonna share my screen because I did decide to do a PowerPoint. So I'm just go ahead and share that screen and get my slides up. I'll do that from my computer. Well, you have to upload it. So I'm going to just go ahead on and just talk from my experience. So LAMC is an organization in the city of North Charleston, South Carolina, and we are the communities we work in. So we primarily work in 7 environmental justice communities. And these communities are sandwiched between good movements infrastructure. So that's roads, that's trains, that's a port, right? So we're sandwiched in between all those infrastructures that supports the movement of goods from port activities to trucking activities, warehousing. So you can imagine the communities that we work in and the challenges they are not only having with quality of life issues, but they're having challenges also with air quality. So that was the primary purpose for us beginning to understand the impacts, right, that these projects was having on our communities. So we teamed with Dr. Wilson. We collaborated with Dr. Wilson and his then was the University of South Carolina, and we did that work with him basically to identify areas of concern, because we just had so much that we were dealing with. We had to identify where those concerns were. And we purchased with a grant. We received the NIH grant, and we purchased with that grant some really federal reference monitors. So we used the same monitors as the state DHEC used, because we wanted to compare apples to apples, right? So we want to get that analysis done first. So that was our first leap into air monitoring work. Now, the challenges that came along with that, right? The sustainability of that. It was very costly to not only collect that particulate matter that we were pulling out of the air that was being filtered, right? These were being filtered and captured on a kind of like a cotton type material that had to be sent to the lab for analysis, right? So it became very costly for us to sustain that type of monitoring. So we began to, but we had to do that initially to gather our baseline data and information, right? So that set our baseline information for our air quality work to be able to track the impacts of goods movement in our community over time. Then we graduated to more low cost monitoring that allowed us to set up some kind of screening tools, right? To be able to launch these types of tools in our community in various areas so we can get spot monitoring in our community, kind of figure out what was happening in specific areas. So what that allowed us to do, and we have stationary monitors set up in 3 of our communities, Ackaby, Rosemont, and Union Heights. And what we have been able to show with these monitors is that during peak time, we do see peaks, right? During when people are early traffic times in the morning, late traffic times in the afternoon, we see those peaks, right? So what we are now having discussions about, how do we take that information and display it in a way to the community using some type of visual tool, using some type of alert system, like a color code that alerts the community on when is a good time for them to go out and use the park. When is a good time, particularly vulnerable population, your elderly, your children, those who are asthmatic or have other respiratory concerns. When is a good time to go out into your community? So we're looking at how do we display that in a way that is useful to the community. Second, we have graduated now where we are using purple airs. And we have these monitoring stations, and we have whole sites, and we monitor the air. We collect climate, like temperature and wind and other type of weather information. And in certain communities, that particularly communities that are experiencing flooding and those type of issues, we also have webcams, web cameras that are on those sites that are looking at flood impacts in communities. So we're using these sites for more than just air monitoring, but other type of monitoring in the community as well. So I'm gonna stop there. I don't know how much time we had to present, but I'm gonna stop there and then look forward to answering any questions that come up about the work that we're doing in the community.
All right, thank you, Omar, for that great talk. So next we have Alan Smith, if you're ready with your presentation.
Yeah, hope my internet can hold up to this. Apologies for jumping back in there, but I think there's a lot of wonderful overlaps already, and I'm excited to share some ideas with you all and hear more about what Omar's up to. So go ahead and jump to the next slide. So over the course of the last year, I'm actually here representing both myself and this gentleman that I referenced earlier, Kaveh Waddell, who was an investigative journalist with Consumer Reports. And over the last year, he's been working with Dr. Jacoby Wilson on this larger investigation, which we kind of have been publishing and then figuring out how we organize around that CR. So the investigation that Kaveh set out to do to kind of figure out answers to 2 major questions. Where does Amazon open its warehouses? What can we say about that around the country? And I promise this does tie intimately and immediately back to air quality, because how do these warehouses then affect their neighbors? That is sort of the 2 overarching questions that we're trying to unpack, and kind of motivated by 2 big ideas: learning about the communities that are starting to organize to push back against Amazon warehouses, and in some ways e-warehouses in general, not always just about Amazon. And then the second major motivating factor that got us into this storyline is the fact that Amazon's footprint has absolutely exploded. So we can go to the next slide, just since the beginning of the pandemic, essentially. So this is sort of new Amazon warehouses by year. You can see that in 2020, that just absolutely jumped. 300 new facilities opened around the country, which is almost as many as the 4 previous years combined. And you can see that each of those years was record-setting or nearly record-setting in its own way. This doesn't show 2021 numbers because we published before the end of that year, but the trajectory is continuing. It has slowed somewhat, so we're not going to see quite the same huge jump up because of economic conditions, but Amazon, we know, can snap right back into a growth mode as soon as they'd like to. And we know that they're also holding on to some warehouses that are built, but not yet totally online. So we can go on to the next slide. So of our 2 questions, the first question was easier. Where does Amazon open its warehouses? So we got a big database of all of the Amazon warehouses around the country, overlaid it with some census data. The big takeaway: Amazon opens most of its warehouses in neighborhoods with a disproportionately high number of people of color and a disproportionately high number of low-income residents. This graph here does show some of the proportions there, but you can see how many more warehouses on the right side. That's more residents of color than average. Oh, I'm sorry. One more. We can go one slide back, maybe, or one slide. There we go. Now forward 2. Should have just run on myself. Sorry, y'all. This is the graph that I was just referencing there. One more. Well, I think I saw it on my screen for a second. Anyway, let's go back to that previous image of the there we go. So we know that they're opening in all sorts of warehouses in places with high numbers of people of color and low-income residents. We also know that when we looked for patterns, that the color line was a stronger pattern than the income line, although that did sort of hold up. And also just to note that the mapping of this was actually much more difficult than we thought, because Amazon is sort of opening warehouses and closing warehouses, and opening warehouses and closing warehouses all over the place. But there we go. You are now on the slide that I was hoping we would be on. Let's go one slide forward, please, because this is an example here of one Amazon warehouse in question. So maybe you all can see this on the page. Maybe it's a little bit too small, but the sort of takeaway here is that 47,000 people live within 1 mile of this particular Amazon delivery station, and 88% of those people are Hispanic. That particular space there that is in Chicago, but we found that scattered all over the country, all the different places we were looking at. And also on that graph right there, the yellow image, or the reddish image, is the warehouse, and right around that are 2 blue things that are schools. 3 blue things that are schools, one of them being elementary, 2 of them being elementary schools, and one of them being middle school. And so this is a pretty good example of what happens in these last mile facilities. Unlike where Amazon used to be opening things in these giant warehouses that were far out in the middle of nowhere, these warehouses are really plopped right down in the middle of a community. Thousands and thousands of people living within a mile of this warehouse, and then also schools and other places of community gathering right around. And that means, and we can move on to the next slide here, a real laundry list of bad stuff for that community to deal with for each one of these last mile warehouses. We're talking traffic congestion. We're talking pedestrian safety, cyclist safety. We're talking noise complaints, vibrations, torn up roads, damaged property. And that's not even to get the health plus environmental effects of increased asthma, health ramifications, all of those sorts of things. I think over the course of this panel, we're going to hear a lot of these sort of stories, but in Kaveh's reporting, we were hearing about kids who used to, have to huddle in their parents' beds because the constant noise of the semi trucks outside were keeping them sitting in their own room. Now they sleep with a TV on to drown out the noise. Stories of people who are spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars in repairing cracks in the stucco of their house just from the increased vibrations of these trucks going by. 7-year-old daughter getting nosebleeds twice a week, and son sneezing constantly. People who had a home and were building a life in a particular community suddenly having these spin wheel of death. So I may have lost you. If you guys can still hear me, let me know. But if I'm going, am I back? Did I lose you all? Okay. Sorry if I lost you all there for a second. I want to go to the second to last slide, please, because if my connection is going to be going in and out here, I want to kind of get to where I think consumer reports can be helpful in all of this, which is talking about the data gap. The balance of power is really tipped toward Amazon in all these situations. They know exactly the ramifications of these warehouses moving in, but in many cases, without hyperlocal information being held by the community, there's really no way for the community to organize and push back. We see in our reporting, we saw again and again, communities losing out to corporations, Amazon not being held accountable, and not even really necessarily living up to its own billing, the community agreements that it promised when it was moving in. And then, so last slide here, because what we're trying to do about that in a very specific, interesting case study is in Red Hook, Brooklyn. And this is starting to sound a little bit like what Omar was just telling us about, because we're trying to set up a similar network, starting with traffic monitoring paired with air quality monitoring. So also using those purple air monitors that Omar was talking about, and then pairing that with some truck counting devices to kind of see if we can get real-time data to sync up there. Trying to then add in noise monitoring and vibration monitoring, so to kind of get that unholy triumvirate or unholy quadrumvirate of community harm there and measure that over time. And hopefully with, the goal here is to not just gather this data, but as Omar was saying, figure out intelligent ways to present it back to community members so that people can utilize this in their daily life. I think the consumer reports, with our sort of history of scientific investigation and of sort of rigorous data-driven work, is in a good position here to be helpful to the overall air monitoring movement, because we can sort of put our stamp of official backed by science-ness on things and maybe hopefully get a good measurement, a good data baseline for folks in Red Hook, but then maybe also something we can export, maybe some software that is useful to other organizers, maybe a toolkit for how to set these things up, and then also hopefully look and feel a way to communicate these things to community members so that they're useful, not just kind of data gathering for us scientists to sit back and keep to ourselves. So that's all good for me. I look forward to hearing from the rest of us, and hopefully we can get a roundtable discussion together if my internet will allow it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Smith. That's a very insightful presentation. And so next we have, let's see, Rachel White.
Hi, thank you. I'm going to share my slides, so I want to ask for somebody to verbally tell me that you all can see them. Can you all see my slides?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
It says I'm sharing.
Let's see.
If not, then Zaria, if you could please share my slides, that will work too. Here we go. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm here from Achieving Community Tasks Successfully. This organization was started by Bridget Murray, and you can go to the next slide. So our founder is Bridget Murray. This is a community-based nonprofit organization and was designated with the 501c3 in 2013. We are a member of the HBCU CBO Gulf Coast Equity Consortium since 2017, and we're committed to the betterment of underserved communities in Houston, Texas, through community engagement, training, resource allocation, and data to action. Next slide. So our mission statement is empowering grassroots community interventions through information, resources, and training that can result in positive change to achieve goals and objectives for sustainability. Next slide. So this organization serves the Pleasantville community. And Pleasantville is the first planned African-American community in Texas, and it was established in 1948. This community is 4.7 miles from fresh food options, 10 miles from a full-service hospital, and is sandwiched between several sources of pollution as well as freeways. So on the right here, you'll see this is the green is the census tract where Pleasantville belongs, and it is surrounded by freeways, and there's also the Budweiser Brewery, other manufacturing, cement batch plants, and a lot of 18-wheeler truck traffic. So this community, to give you an idea, from the 2010 census, it has not changed much since then. There's a majority Black residents, followed by Hispanics, white, and other. So we can go to the next slide. I wanted to show this because Pleasantville is here in the yellow square with the red line pointing to it, and it is surrounded by a lot of facilities releasing toxic chemicals. And this is data that's from 2020. In 2020, there were 9.6 million pounds of toxics released into the air. And water, 3.8 million pounds, land, 18.3 million pounds. So this is just to give you an idea of the sources of pollution exposure that residents in Pleasantville are exposed to. So next slide. One thing I particularly wanted to talk about today is particulate matter, because that is actually what our air monitoring is focused on. So particulate matter is a mixture of solid particles such as dust, dirt, soot, and smoke, and liquid droplets found in the air. Next slide. So there are a lot of sources of particulate matter. I'm going to get into it a little bit later, but PM 2.5 is particulate matter of 2.5 microns. That's the size. It's very small. I'm going to explain that a little bit later, but I wanted to say that the sources of this PM 2.5 pollution in Houston, Harris County are from the large industrial complex. We have one of the largest industrial complexes in the world. And we also have a lot of extensive road traffic. We have accidental releases. This picture here at the bottom is actually from the Intercontinental Terminal fire that occurred. And this occurred in Harris County. It lasted for a few days, and there were toxic chemicals released from this. And so this is just an example of occurrences within our region. So next slide. Particulate matter is in two widely accepted sizes, 10 micrometers and smaller and 2.5 micrometers and smaller. PM 2.5 actually poses the most significant risk to human health. And if you can imagine, it's smaller than a grain of sand. It's smaller than a hair. It's very, very small. We'll go to the next slide. And so because it's so small, it can get lodged into your lungs, cause inflammation, and this can result in impaired lung function like asthma, COPD, can result in cardiovascular disease like heart attack, stroke, and even mortality. Next slide. So I wanted to mention, okay, how does the EPA regulate PM 2.5? The EPA, based on the Clean Air Act, which was last amended in 1990, established PM 2.5 as one of the 6 principal pollutants, which can be harmful to public health and the environment. And it's part of the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So the National Ambient Air Quality Standards say that the annual average PM 2.5 exposure for the public is 12, and the 24-hour average is 35. So if PM 2.5 levels exceed these averages, either the annual or the 24-hour average, then they are not in compliance with the Clean Air Act. So these numbers are important for the analysis that I will show later. Next slide. So these national ambient air quality standards are always under review. And actually right now, the EPA is reconsidering the yearly average to go from 12 to 10. And this is important because extensive studies, research has shown that there is an associated risk of death even below levels of 12. And one paper found that exposure to PM 2.5 of less than 12 micrograms per meter cube was associated with an increased risk of death of 13.6%. So next slide. I wanted to show again, Pleasantville, the community that ACT serves, is here in yellow, and there's red lines pointing to it in all of these maps. These are heat maps for prevalence of chronic diseases. So the lighter the color, the lower the prevalence, the darker the color, the higher the prevalence. So as you can see, Pleasantville resides in a census tract that is the darkest color for all of these maps, for asthma, heart disease, diabetes, COPD, stroke, and cancer. And so we know that, food deserts, diet, exercise, lifestyle choices, all of these things do contribute to chronic disease, but perhaps air pollution is also a major contributor to these chronic illnesses. And if this is something that we can change or modify and reduce the amount of air pollution that residents are exposed to, maybe we can reduce the prevalence of some of these chronic diseases. So next slide. Okay, now the important part, how we established our community air monitoring network. So we established it in November of 2019, and we have a total of 8 sensors. Currently, we have 2 sensors that are co-located with the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality federal regulatory monitors. And then 6 have already been co-located with this regulatory monitor to be calibrated. And we're waiting for one to finish calibrating, and then we'll put it back in the community. So this is important because, like Omar mentioned, these regulatory monitors are the monitors that provide data to make actions and change the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. And so we do calibrate our monitors with the regulatory monitors. Currently, we're measuring PM 2.5 and NO2. We are still working on the calibration for NO2. and that is under review. So primarily PM 2.5. And we do use the Clarity Node S sensors. So next slide. We can go to the next slide. So here's some analysis that was done from the Community Air Monitoring Network. So as I mentioned before, the standard for the year is 12 micrograms per meter cubed. And we do see impacts, health impacts as low as 8 micrograms per meter cubed. So this is just one example of a month. The last one we did was in June. And you see it circled in red here, there are spikes, right, above 35. Although this is not a 24-hour average, if these acute exposures and spikes happen frequently, we can see health impacts from them. On the right, this map shows where our monitors are located. And then at the bottom is where the monitors are co-located with the TCEQ monitor. So next slide. I just put this here to show you that actually most of the time, the levels are above 12 in the Pleasantville community. Next slide. And I'll talk more about that here. So in May, the Community Air Monitoring Network saw levels above 12, 45% of the time. And in June, it was above 12, 52% of the time. So if you can imagine, right, if just in 1 month, over half of the time, we're experiencing levels above 12, that means the yearly average is probably really close to 12. And we did see that last year, our average was around 10. And so if we were to lower that standard from 12 to 10, we would be, not in compliance with the Clean Air Act, and in non-attainment is the term. So next slide. So we hope that, one thing that did happen, TCEQ did recognize us for providing data from our Community Air Monitoring Network and installed a federal reference monitor in Pleasantville. And they plan to install it by the end of the calendar year of 2020. So we plan to share this data in hopes that TCEQ, the EPA, can assist and can inform them about lowering the standard. And we produce monthly reports on our website so that the community can see when levels are high, if they should take action, stay indoors, things of that nature. Next slide. One thing I did want to mention here before I end is that I get a lot of questions often, who should we, talk to about any concerns that we have in our community? About pollution, air pollution, water pollution. First responders like law enforcement, firefighters, they are not the best for long-term impacts, right? Your public health department is the best department to contact and interact with and voice your concerns, because they will be able to better assess any long-term or cumulative impacts from air pollution. First responders are there to protect immediate life and safety following like a chemical release, but they may not be able to help with these health impacts that we are most concerned with as communities in environmental justice. So I did want to mention that here. And then next slide. I know I'm close to time, so just, if you do have a community air monitoring network, or if your community suffers greatly from disasters, such as Houston, we have a lot of hurricanes. We did a disaster survey where we would share this information with elected officials, local public health departments. We're also part of the local emergency planning committee, where we talk about different aspects of chemical releases and how to prepare. And we have campaigns for individuals with disabilities to sign on with 211. Next slide. Thank you to funders and collaborators. And I'll end here since I know I'm probably at time.
All right. Thank you for your great presentation, Rachel. And next we have Kim Gaddy.
Thank you. And so Clean Water Action has partnered with South Water Environmental Alliance, Friends of the Earth, SIEGE, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, EOSHI at Rutgers University, to put forth our air quality monitoring. The mission of the Southward Environmental Alliance, and I founded this organization about 5 years ago, and we received our first funding last year. We are an alliance of community-based organizations and residents with a focus on environmental justice issues in the South Ward of Newark. The South Ward of Newark is the largest ward of our city, and it includes 3 neighborhoods. We have the Dayton Street neighborhood, which is closest to the port, the Clinton Hill, and then the Weequahic section. And our mission is to cultivate healthy and vibrant neighborhoods by ensuring that resident voices are heard and they are active participants in making the policies that they need to make that impact their neighborhood. Next slide. The air monitoring project, I first want to give a shout out to my environmental justice organizer for SWIA, Asada Rashidi. This is her presentation. She is the main person that actually does this on a daily basis. And so this, I just want to thank her for putting this slide together as well. And this was something that we needed because we need to be able to control the narrative that is happening in our community. We know we are disproportionately polluted upon with cumulative impacts of pollution. And so this air quality monitoring project is our way of ground truthing and coming up with a plan so we could change the situation that the 75,000 residents in the southward of the city of Newark suffer from on a daily basis. Next slide. Some background information, as I mentioned earlier, we are a frontline and fence line community, backyard of the second largest port. 1 out of 4 children in the South Ward suffer from asthma. It is a chronic disease that is the silent killer. In the city of Newark and on the news, you hear about homicides and when individuals are, killed or shot in our city. But the fact of the matter is more individuals die of asthma on a yearly basis than homicides. But we don't see this on the TV or in the news. The South Ward is bound by rail and highway. The South Ward community has a Superfund site. We have one of the largest metals recycling facility in the world located in our backyard. And so when you think about cumulative impacts of pollution, the industry, all of this is located and specifically in the Dayton Street neighborhood on about a 15-block area. So the Southward Environmental Alliance wanted to conduct this air monitoring project to make sure that the community voices were heard and they had a seat at the table, and how this data was going to be collected and then what the story was going to be behind it. Next slide. It is so important. I mean, Clean Water Action and SWIA is very intentional about making sure that whenever you are putting something together, when it relates to community, back one slide, that you are engaging the community. And so we always start with an advisory board. And for this project in particular, the Southward Air Quality Monitoring Advisory Board consists of 11 Southward residents from each of those 3 neighborhoods that I talked about. So we wanted to make sure that each neighborhood, whether they have more trucks or more pollution than the other, that they have a seat at the table and are able to participate in a meaningful manner. They know their neighborhood. And so it is real important that we utilize the expertise, the knowledge, and the skill sets of the community members when we are ready to say, where should the monitors be located? How should we plan? How will the data be disseminated? Who will own the data? So these are very important issues and criteria that we have to make sure residents are controlling. Next slide. These are the purple air monitoring sites. We have 10 sites where we're utilizing purple air monitors, similar to what Omar and Rachel stated, for our community to understand what is happening. We selected daycare centers, places of worship, businesses, a park. These are places where young and older, the most, that is the population that is impacted. And it's very important that we understand and they understand what is happening in their neighborhood. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a variation, but we wanted to be intentional about making sure our children and our elderly, those whose systems are most compromised, is that we have these locations in close proximity to where they travel and recreate on a daily basis. Next slide. This is some pictures of Newark Fire Department where we actually collated with the NJDEP's monitor and our monitor, and then Newark Beth Israel Medical Center, which is one of our partners, and we're so appreciative of that, to have a hospital actually locate a monitor on the outside of their facility. They are doing like an upgrade of the hospital, so there is a lot of trucks and activity that is happening right there in the front, where doors open up and patients are in the emergency room or folks are walking into the hospital. So they are a key supporter, and that's one of the monitors that is located right on their facility. Next slide. These are a couple other locations, the church that we talked about, Clinton Hill Early Childhood Center, and a Club Eclipse, where families have different birthdays and celebrations. So these sites are like hotspots in our community as well. Club Eclipse is located alongside 78, which is a major highway that comes through our community. Clinton Hill Early Childhood Center is off of Hawthorne Avenue, in a major thoroughfare where oftentimes trucks that come off of 78 and should not be traveling on our local roads, but they do, or they park their rigs there overnight or while they're waiting to get in line at the Newark port. And then, of course, our churches, where individuals are going to their place of worship, and they are confronted by high level of truck activity and polluting facilities that are located next to their location. Next slide. Now, the Green Alliance Leadership Academy is crucial. Clean Water Action established an environmental leadership institute about 20 years ago to train up residents around environmental justice leaders, talking about how to speak to your elected officials, how to understand what is happening in your neighborhood, how to write like a press release, how to engage a local official. And so it was from out of that concept that SWIA created the Green Alliance Leadership Academy, and the Clean Water Action Executive Director Amy Goldsmith was the main instructor, along with SEED staff, to come in and lift up some of these workshop topics. DEP came in and talked about the community corner that we have and EJ screens. It is so important that residents kind of understand what material is out there and how to access information so that they can increase their knowledge. And so with partnering with Clean Water Action and DEP and EOSHI, we was able to put together leadership training workshops to increase the knowledge and participation of the residents. We wanted to meet the residents where they are, but then we also wanted them to feel comfortable about the dialogue and conversation with our mayor, with Senator Booker, with our Congressman Donald Payne. We wanted them to be able to know what they can say to them so that we could bring about the right kind of changes that we need in our community. Next slide. One of the ways that we also gather this information is we use air beams along with the purple air monitors. And so we will go out into our community and we will do truck counts and air monitoring. In about April of 2022, SWE and Clean Water Action hosted trainings and a daily air monitoring event. And on 3 different days at 12 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 8 a.m., 12 o'clock, and 4 p.m., they counted over 5,000 trucks. Next slide. This is just some pictures of the, and I know coming up to time, of the different activity in meetings. I mean, it's important to actually go to the community. The slide to the right was at Newark Bethesda for National Asthma Day. We was a participant and a partner with Bethesda Hospital, Robert Wood Johnson, and we was able to talk to residents about what was happening. And then you could see from the other slides what we were doing in the community. Next slide. This is just our information where you can reach me at Clean Water Action, and Asada Rashidi, one of our upcoming and future leaders in the environmental justice movement. So you can reach us at cleanwateraction.org or southwardea.com, and looking forward to some dialogue. But as you can see, there's synergies right here at this table. All of us are doing similar work, and it's like no matter what the zip code, it is because of the color of our skin, our socioeconomic status, that we are disproportionately polluted upon, and these things are allowed to happen in our neighborhood. And the only way that we will be able to change it with the on-the-ground, ground truthing, utilizing the relationships like what we're doing here with Dr. Kobe Wilson and his team, and then making sure the right policies are instituted at the local level, the state level, and then at the national level. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that great presentation on the efforts that are happening in Newark, New Jersey. Next, we have Dr. Shizuka Hsieh.
Hi, I think I'm sharing my slides. Does that look okay? All right. Thank you so much. Such powerful talks from all of you. I'm really looking forward to a discussion on this. So I just want to start out by thanking my community partners. I can't include all of the names on here of folks who make the monitoring actually possible. I've worked in DC since 2013 in 2 neighborhoods, Ivy City and Brentwood, where there's a lot of diesel truck, diesel bus activity, and then Buzzard Point, which is concrete batching, and tons of construction. This map right here, beautiful work that came out from George Washington University, not me, 2021, but it illustrates how DC is really segregated. This is the whiter portion, right? It's a gradient as you go across the city. Here's the white portion, here's the black portion of the city, and you can see that PM 2.5 mortality rates that they were able to figure out using hospital data are higher, of course, on this side. And not surprisingly, this is where the heavy industry is located in DC. So I think you all know the answer to this question. I've learned so much from working with these communities, and this is one of the places where my learning really, really started. So I'm going to show data from PM 2.5 monitoring in Ivy City in 2013. We were able to show through monitoring and then extrapolating those data so that we could estimate what was happening over the course of a year. We were able to show that PM 2.5 levels were likely in exceedance of US EPA annual standards. Rachel was talking about that 12 micrograms per meter cubed, and there it is. So those data were really important because the residents could take those to the district and say, hey, you can't put another bus parking lot right in our neighborhood for tourist buses. And eventually that plan, the city dropped it. Right? So data can be very powerful as part of that conversation. But below, here's 3 years of data from 2016 to 2019 in Buzzard Point. And there, the PM 2.5 levels annually below the US EPA limit and maybe even lower than some places within DC. And so the question is, does this mean that the air is safe to breathe in Buzzard Point if it's below the US EPA threshold? And I think you all know the answer to that, right? Rachel told us the answer to that is no. But I think the answer is no for several reasons. And I want to talk about some of the ideas that have percolated because of this disconnect, right, between the monitoring data and what the residents are actually telling me and what I've learned from the residents. So here's Rhonda Hamilton, an incredible community leader, and I've learned so much from her. So I want to hear people's thoughts about rethinking even the idea of EPA regulatory standards, right? We know that they need to be lowered, but even if we lower them, is it a system that actually helps to identify inequities? And I would argue that if you use a threshold, then you could have two communities, one that has very clean air and one that's just below threshold. And with that kind of thinking, right, it allows no action to be taken in the community that has air pollution. Right, so I want to think about using tools to identify inequities, and that thresholds themselves are not necessarily going to be helpful in doing that. The other thing is, I know that all of you have worked so hard. It's really hard work to get these low-cost monitors, right, co-located. DOE didn't let me, DC didn't let me co-locate, right? So you all have been doing incredible work in getting those non-regulatory monitors co-located with federal reference monitors so that we can get good data. And as a scientist, I value that data. But I want to make sure that we're not losing scope of the valuable advantages that there are to these non-regulatory monitors. And I think Omar started to touch on a lot of those advantages to having these non-regulatory monitors. You all talked about purple air, right? That we don't need to use purple air to say that, oh, this area is an attainment, this area is not an attainment, and we can still use it to say these areas have higher air pollution and start to prioritize those areas as places where we start to clean up the air. The other piece of information is one that I saw in Rachel's data, that we're talking about 24-hour standards, annual averages. That doesn't tell you about how the pollution is being delivered. So when I talk to the residents, they describe these huge plumes of dust. Diesel truck goes by, hit in the face, right? Those are very short-lived, high-intensity spikes that they're experiencing, that those are being lost in 1 hour or 24-hour averages. So we started taking a look at the data in another way. We did this because there was a construction site where the permitting said that if the PM10, larger PM from construction, goes higher than 100 micrograms per meter cubed in a 15-minute rolling average, action needed to be taken, right? The construction company had to stop, water things down. Somehow they were doing something that was generating too much dust. Well, if that's true at a construction site, do we have these similarly high-intensity events at a residence? And the answer is yes. Down here is showing that several times a week, these action levels were being met at a residence nearby some of these construction sites, indicating that even though, right, the air is way below, because US EPA standards are 150 micrograms per meter cubed for PM10, right, way below EPA thresholds, right, there's spikes in there, and that's how these residents are experiencing and suffering from this kind of pollution. The other 2 points that I want to make have to do with the types of pollutants and also what we can do with the data. So first, monitoring the right pollutants has been something that I'm trying to learn, and I want to expand my repertoire, right, of what I can actually monitor, or what we can actually monitor. And why is that, right? Fugitive dust is actually what the residents complain the most about in Buzzard Point, right? These clouds of dust from these concrete batching plants, you're very familiar with this. So that means that we need to take a look at PM10, and maybe PM10 will show even more inequities than PM2.5 because it's larger and it deposits a little bit more locally. So hyperlocal monitoring can be really valuable in identifying both spatial inequities for PM10, right, and also how it's being delivered, whether it's coming in big spikes. Another example, we've been doing black carbon monitoring in Brentwood and in Ivy City, thanks to a monitor on loan from the University of Maryland. And black carbon is a portion, right? It's a portion of the PM 2.5. It's that portion that's associated with diesel and biomass burning. And what I want to point out here is, well, of course, the black carbon is only a small portion of the PM 2.5, but you can see that there are spikes and times when black carbon is high, when PM 2.5 is not necessarily high. This isn't surprising. PM 2.5 encompasses so many types of PM 2.5, including things from California wildfires. So I'm looking at this as thinking about using black carbon monitoring as a way to see what's better happening on a local scale. Again, this scatter plot is just going to show that black carbon, right, can be high even when PM 2.5, right, isn't high because of local conditions. I see we only have 5 more minutes and I want to hear from all of you. So I will wrap up as fast as I can. Volatile organic compounds, right? This is something that PM 2.5 isn't going to capture, but this is a clear environmental injustice. This is in Ivy City. This is a residence. And right next door to it is a factory that's been there apparently since about 1970s. And it makes adhesives. And I looked at the chemicals list of what they use, and they include these carcinogens. Horrible, horrible stuff. So I've been trying to beef up my volatile organic compound monitoring. This is Josh, who actually lives in this house, and he's helping me set up a monitor to collect some of that volatile organic compounds on tubes so that I can take those to the lab. So fortunately, I think I only have 2 more slides. Yes. Third, you all showed, like Omar showed, Alan showed, you already are doing this, right? You're using the real-time data to prevent exposures. So what I've heard from the residents is this is what we want. Of course, this is what we want. We don't need a historical record of how they've experienced poor air quality. We want to fix the air quality. So the other thing I've been hearing from the residents is what happens when they actually go to the Department of Energy and Environment, right, to try to rectify some of these things. The current reporting system in DC, at least, is a total burden on the residents. They're supposed to, when they see diesel trucks idling, because that's not supposed to happen, they're supposed to call this 311 number. And then if there's clouds of dust coming from a cement plant, right, they're supposed to call 311. And then nothing happens. Well, real-time monitoring is a way to remove that burden, right, from the residents and actually put the onus where the onus should be on the agencies that are supposed to be protecting human health. So I'm so glad, right, that Kim mentioned that we need to change policy. I know you all have so many ideas about how that should be done. So these are just a few of the ideas that have come up as I've worked with these communities. Again, learning from these communities and listening to what they have to say. Thank you so much. Do we have time for discussion?
Yes, it seems like we have a few minutes for discussion. I want to thank everyone who gave great presentations. And I really wanted to highlight that all of these communities are very unique, and it's very important for storytelling just because these communities are unique. They have their own cultures, their own needs, and that's something that I think is missing whenever we disseminate science. We forget the storytelling part, and we're talking about the livelihood of everyone. Pollution is just isn't a number. whatever micrograms is actually community members, people's lives that are being affected. And I thank everyone for the storytelling. I really enjoyed the images. So we can go with the first question from the audience I see. So can you talk about how you actually got your community members engaged kind of in the process of this air monitoring? And also, any reservations that the community members have or any, excitement. So we can start with Omar, if you can give. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So how we got our residents interested in this is that we saw them from the very beginning of this as experts, right? They are the contextual experts for the experiences, the lived experiences in their communities. And we value that expertise where we compensate them for their time. So we hired individuals from the community to collect the data. We paid them. They became interns. Now they are advocates, right? That are pushing for the policy and pushing for the solutions in their communities. So that was the first way we attracted them to the project. The second way that we attracted them to the project is showing how this relates to them personally, right? So being able to make the connections to their personal lives, that asthma, your quality of life, movement of trucks through your community impacts your quality of life. So being able to make those connections again, because collecting data is not really a fun thing, right? It's nothing fun about collecting data. Okay, we collected data. Now what? Right? That is the number one question we get from communities. Now what? After we collect this data. So how we were able to answer that now what is that they became empowered to use the data how they wanted to use it, right? So the academic could collect the data, use it how they wanted to collect the data. The community has equal access to the data, and then they can collect that data and use the data, right? We have used the data in collaboration or in with photo voice projects. We have used this data to make a case for changes in the local zoning ordinance, right? So we came up with our own. If you look at the zoning codes, right, of any area, they have color. Right, they use color to suggest a zoning a characteristic or a zoning characterization of an area. The community came up with their own color code, right? What we consider to be safe zones or compromised zones or hazard zones. So the community, so that's how we use this data. So we just don't collect the data, but we use the data in ways that is useful to the community, how the community see this as value. So that's how we have been able to attract people to our projects and keep them interested in participating in the work that we do.
And I guess I would want to add something real quick. Clean Water Action has the ability to, we have 501c and C4. And so we was able to have meetings with Senator Cory Booker, Congressman Donald Payne. We actually brought them to our community, and then people began to see it in the newspaper. Oh, why is the congressman out here talking about all the trucks on Freeland Heights Avenue? And then they would see Senator Booker and then Mayor Raz Baraka. And so that kind of gave a little bit of the credibility, but because we wanted to hype up, to let folks know how bad this really was. And then individuals from the community was like, what? How can I get involved? This is it. I have asthma. My daughter have asthma. Or my brother died of cancer. And so we was able to use the media and our local elected officials, statewide and national, to then assist us in lifting up this story. And so when Clean Water Action was able to bring that piece out, now on the ground, Southwater Environmental Alliance had the ability to now go door to door and began to talk to people, go out to our community meetings. And so it became important because it was relevant to their lives. It was a sense of urgency because people knew that their health was impacted. And then because the young kids saw it on the news, they was able to say, hey, let me engage myself in this fight. So that was key.
I was going to say one other thing that others haven't mentioned yet. We also engage with our community members to have them report to us if they smell anything or if they see anything. And on those days, we have partnered with EBF, and they created an air tracker. So we can look and see where sources of pollution may be coming from. And also in our analysis, point to those days when residents who live in the community are saying, okay, today we noticed there was smoke, or we noticed whatever the case may be. And so we try to align our data with those reports. And I think they value that because this is information from them and they know what's going on, right? You know, others that aren't inside the community aren't aware. So that's all I wanted to say.
All right. So unfortunately, I think we're towards the end of our time for our session. This was some great discussion for the audience and also the panelists. If you have any questions, please reach out to the panelists via the website. The information is on the website. This was a great discussion. I wish we had more time because I also had questions as well. But first, I would like to thank our panelists for the great presentations. I would like to thank the audience for joining us and also engaging with us. I would like to thank the CEEJH staff and administrators for hosting the session and putting this all together. We ask you to keep enjoying the symposium, and as we move to our next session at 2:30, and I'd like to thank everyone. All right, thank you, and have a great day.